Have you ever looked at someone and seen only their uniform, not the person wearing it? Have you ever measured a person's worth by the job they do, by the apron they tie around their waist or the broom they hold in their hands? We all do it, sometimes without even thinking. We build walls of status and title, and in doing so, we risk missing the extraordinary, the brilliant, the truly beautiful souls hidden in plain sight. This is a story about one such soul, a young woman named Alara, who was seen as nothing more than a waitress. But she held a universe of knowledge within her, waiting for just one person to look close enough to see it. Her story reminds us that greatness doesn't always announce itself with a trumpet. Sometimes, it whispers from the quietest corners, and its power, once unleashed, can change everything. Alara worked at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that had once been the crown jewel of the city's culinary scene, but was now slowly losing its luster. It was a place of starched white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, and patrons who wore their wealth like a second skin. To them, Alara was part of the furniture, a ghost in a black and white uniform who appeared with water and disappeared with empty plates. She was quiet, diligent, and almost pathologically unobtrusive. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her features into a mask of serene neutrality. But beneath that placid surface, a storm of memory and passion churned. Alara wasn't just a waitress, she was the daughter of a chef, a brilliant man who had poured his entire life into his own little restaurant, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the glorious scent of real food. He had taught her everything. He taught her how to smell the rain on a fresh tomato, how to listen for the perfect sizzle of garlic in olive oil, how to taste not just ingredients, but the story behind them, the soil, the sun, the hands that had harvested them. Her palate was a library of flavors, a gift she had inherited and honed by his side. But that life had been stolen from them. A fire, a crushing debt, a broken heart that simply stopped beating. Her father was gone, the restaurant was a pile of ash and memory, and Alara was left with nothing but his lessons and a profound, aching void. Now, she served food she could never afford to eat to people who didn't truly taste it, her hidden genius a secret she kept locked away like a precious, painful jewel. Every dish she carried from the kitchen was a phantom limb, a reminder of the life she'd lost. She'd wiped down a table, her mind deconstructing the smear of sauce left on a plate, identifying the herbs, the age of the wine in the reduction, the subtle mistake in its balance. She was a master living in a servant's world, a virtuoso forced to be an usher, and no one, absolutely no one, had any idea. The owner of the Gilded Spoon, Arthur Sterling, was a man adrift in his own legacy. He paced the plush carpet of his upstairs office, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the hollow clatter of the dining room below. On his mahogany desk, spreadsheets screamed a story of slow, undeniable decline. Profits were down, reservations were dwindling, and the coveted Michelin star they had held for 2 decades was rumored to be in jeopardy. The restaurant had been his father's masterpiece, a symphony of classic French cuisine built on precision and tradition. Arthur had inherited the orchestra, but had long since lost the music. He felt like a fraud, a caretaker of a museum that people no longer wanted to visit. He'd walk through the dining room, his shoulders tight with anxiety, observing the scene. The food was, by all technical measures, perfect. The cuts of meat were exact, the sauces were glossy, the plating was a work of art. But it was cold art. It was food without a soul, cooked by a chef who valued technique over feeling and served by a staff trained in efficiency, not warmth. The patrons mirrored the food, wealthy, bored, and disconnected. They ate without joy, talked without passion, and paid without a second thought. Mr. Sterling saw it all, and a wave of despair washed over him. He had tried everything. He'd hired consultants, refreshed the decor, and offered promotions, but it was like trying to revive a flower by polishing its leaves instead of watering its roots. The core of the problem eluded him. He was a businessman, not a visionary like his father. He understood numbers, not nuance. He could read a balance sheet, but he couldn't read the heart of his own restaurant. He would often stop and watch his staff, searching for a spark, a hint of the passion his father used to inspire in everyone from the head chef to the dishwasher. He saw only a collection of individuals performing their roles. He saw Marcus, his manager, a man who ran the floor like a drill sergeant, enforcing rules with an iron fist, but offering no inspiration. He saw the chefs, focused intently on their stations, their faces illuminated by the heat lamps, but their eyes devoid of creative fire. And he saw the servers, moving like automatons through the maze of tables. He saw Alara, though he didn't know her name. He saw her quiet efficiency, the way she never made a mistake, never drew attention to herself. He saw her as a perfect cog in a broken machine, and the thought offered him no comfort at all. He felt a deep, gnawing frustration, a sense that the answer was right in front of him, yet completely invisible. He was the captain of a beautiful, gilded ship that was slowly, silently sinking, and he had no idea how to turn it around. Into this atmosphere of quiet desperation walked Mrs. Eleanor Davenport. She didn't so much enter the Gilded Spoon as she did conquer it. Draped in fur and glittering with diamonds, she moved with an air of absolute, unshakable entitlement, her two companions trailing in her wake like well-dressed pilot fish. The restaurant staff tensed. Mrs. Davenport was not just a regular, she was a storm system, a notoriously difficult patron whose satisfaction was a moving target, and whose displeasure was a Category 5 hurricane. Marcus, the floor manager, immediately rushed to her side, his professional smile plastered on his face, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of dread. "Mrs. Davenport, what a pleasure. Your usual table is ready," he said, his voice a smooth balm of practiced deference. Marcus was a man who worshipped at the altar of the status quo. He believed in hierarchy, in rules, and above all, in placating the wealthy. To him, the staff were interchangeable parts, their value measured solely by their ability to remain silent and obedient. He barely knew Alara's name, referring to her, and the other waitresses as the girls. He saw her diligence not as a virtue, but as the bare minimum required to keep her job. He was the gatekeeper of mediocrity, and his primary function was to ensure no ripples disturbed the stagnant water of the restaurant's daily operations. Mrs. Davenport waved a dismissive hand. "I hope it's been properly sanitized, Marcus. The last time I was here, I believe I detected a smudge on my water glass." Her voice was low and melodic, but each word was sharpened to a fine point. Marcus assured her it was immaculate, his head bobbing in agreement. The table, of course, fell in Alara's section. As she approached with the menus, her steps were measured, her expression neutral. She had served Mrs. Davenport before. She knew the drill: avoid eye contact, speak only when spoken to, and anticipate every unspoken whim. "Good evening, ma'am," Alara said, her voice soft but clear. Mrs. Davenport didn't even look at her. She was busy regaling her friends with a story about a disastrous trip to Milan where the hotel's thread count was, in her words, practically burlap. She treated Alara's presence as she would a breeze, something to be ignored until it became inconvenient. When it was time to order, she snapped her fingers without looking up. "You girl. I'll have the saffron risotto with seared scallops. And tell the chef if the risotto is even slightly gummy, I will be sending it back to his kitchen personally. And the scallops had better be U10s. I can tell the difference." Her tone was not just demanding, it was laced with a casual cruelty, a clear message that Alara was not a person but a function, a conduit for her commands. Alara simply nodded. "Of course, ma'am." An excellent choice. She took the other orders and retreated toward the kitchen, the weight of the woman's arrogance feeling like a physical pressure on her back. She was used to it, but that didn't make it any less heavy. The order was placed, and the kitchen, already on high alert because of Mrs. Davenport's presence, executed it with painstaking precision. The head chef, a proud and temperamental man named Julian, personally oversaw the risotto. He toasted the arborio rice perfectly, added the hot broth ladle by ladle, and at the last moment, bloomed the expensive saffron threads before stirring them in, turning the dish a magnificent, sunny gold. The U10 scallops were seared to a flawless caramelization, their centers translucent and sweet. It was, by all technical standards, a perfect dish. Alara carried the plate from the kitchen, balancing it with the steady hands of a surgeon. The aroma rose to meet her, and in that instant she knew. It was a subtle thing, a ghost of a scent that was missing. It was the deep, honeyed, almost medicinal note of true, high-grade Spanish saffron. What she smelled was still saffron, but it was a lesser variety, likely from Iran or Greece. It was a good ingredient, but not the right one for a dish that wore the spice's name as its crown. It was the kind of detail 999 out of 1,000 people would never notice. But Alara was the one, and she suspected, with a sinking feeling, that Mrs. Davenport, for all her awfulness, might just be perceptive enough to be the second. She placed the dish before the woman with a quiet, "Your saffron risotto, ma'am." Mrs. Davenport stared at it for a long moment, her lips pursed. She didn't pick up her fork. She picked up the plate and held it closer to her face, inhaling dramatically. Her friends watched, waiting for the verdict. "No," Mrs. Davenport said, her voice dangerously soft. She pushed the plate away. "This is wrong." Marcus, who had been hovering nearby, swooped in. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Davenport? Is the dish not to your liking?" "It's not a matter of liking, Marcus," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's a matter of it being incorrect. The saffron. It's weak. It's inferior. This tastes like something I'd be served on an airplane." An insult. Chef Julian, informed of the complaint via the kitchen's computer system, was furious. He sent a message back, "The dish is perfect. The customer is mistaken." Marcus, caught between a volatile chef and a volcanic customer, began to sweat. He tried to placate her, offering to have it remade, offering a different dish, offering a bottle of champagne. Mrs. Davenport was having none of it. Her indignation had found its target, and she was going to enjoy the show. She pointed a long, manicured finger not at Marcus, but at the silent figure standing by the service station. "It was her," she declared. "The waitress. She probably dropped it on the way here." The accusation was absurd, but it served its purpose, to shift the blame to the lowest status person in the room. All eyes turned to Alara, who stood frozen, the accusation hanging in the air like a foul odor. The situation escalated with the speed of a lit fuse. Mrs. Davenport, now the center of a silent, watching dining room, seemed to swell with self-importance. She had an audience, and she was determined to perform. "Look at her," she said, her voice carrying across the room, dripping with contempt. "Standing there as if she's done nothing wrong. People like this have no standards. No pride in their work." She gestured grandly to Alara. "You waitress. You brought me this garbage. You probably don't even know what saffron is, do you? You just carry the plates." Alara remained silent, her face a pale, impassive mask, but inside, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She could feel the stares of every diner, the mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Marcus rushed to Mrs. Davenport's side, his hands fluttering nervously. "Mrs. Davenport, please, I assure you, the staff is very well trained. It must be a misunderstanding in the kitchen." "I'm not talking to you, Marcus," she barked. "I'm talking to her." She then did something that sucked the remaining air out of the room. With a flick of her wrist, she deliberately knocked her full glass of red wine onto the pristine white floor, where it shattered in a splash of crimson. The sound was like a gunshot. "Oh dear," she said with theatrical dismay. "Look what happened. A mess." She then looked directly at Alara, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "Well? Don't just stand there. Clean it up." She paused, letting the humiliation hang in the air. Then she delivered the final, cruel blow. "On your knees," she commanded. "While you're cleaning it up. That's the proper position for service, isn't it? On your knees. That's where people like you belong." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated cruelty, a power play so blatant and demeaning it felt medieval. Alara's friends on the staff looked on in horror, helpless. Marcus was paralyzed, his mind racing. To confront Mrs. Davenport was to risk losing a wealthy client and creating a scene that would be talked about for weeks. To allow this to happen was to sacrifice the dignity of his employee. In his calculus of profit and loss, an employee's dignity was, unfortunately, the more expendable asset. He opened his mouth to weakly suggest he would get a busboy, but Mrs. Davenport cut him off. No. Her, she insisted, pointing at Alara. I want her to do it. Now the world seemed to slow down. For Alara, the noisy restaurant faded into a dull roar. All she could see was the glittering shard of glass in the pool of red wine, and the imperious, hateful face of the woman demanding her submission. Kneel. The word echoed in her mind, a symbol of every indignity she had suffered, every time she had been made to feel small, invisible, and worthless since losing her father. Something inside her, a quiet, resilient core that had survived fire and grief, began to harden. In that deafening silence, every eye was on Alara. They expected her to fold. They expected tears or a grudging, humiliated surrender. They saw a waitress, a young woman in a uniform, powerless against the crushing weight of a wealthy patron's whim. But they were not seeing Alara. They were seeing the apron. Alara took a slow breath, centering herself. The memory of her father's voice came to her, a warm and steady anchor in the storm. Never let anyone make you feel small, my love. Your worth is inside you. No one can take it away. She lifted her chin, and for the first time that evening, she looked directly into Mrs. Davenport's eyes. Her own gaze was not defiant, not angry, but clear, calm, and incredibly powerful. Ma'am, she said, her voice not loud, but carrying with absolute clarity through the silent room. I will not kneel. The two simple words were a revolution. A shockwave went through the diners. Marcus's jaw dropped. Mrs. Davenport's smug expression flickered with disbelief, then hardened into fury. What did you just say to me? She hissed. You are fired. Marcus, fire her this instant. But Alara wasn't finished. She held Mrs. Davenport's gaze, refusing to be dismissed. I will not kneel, she repeated calmly. But I will tell you what is wrong with your dish. Without waiting for permission, she took a small step forward. You are correct, ma'am. There is something missing. It is not the chef's technique, which is flawless. It is the saffron. She spoke with the quiet authority of an expert, her voice weaving a spell of pure knowledge. The Gilded Spoon has always used coupe-grade Spanish saffron from La Mancha. It is known for its deep crimson color and an aroma that carries notes of honey, floral meadows, and a slight, pleasant bitterness. The saffron in your risotto tonight is a lower grade. It is still saffron, but it lacks the aromatic complexity. Its notes are flatter, more earthy, and less floral. It's what gives the dish a feeling of being incomplete. She paused, letting the information settle. The entire room was captivated. To compensate for this particular batch, she continued, as if giving a masterclass, the chef would need to bloom it in a liquid with a slightly higher acidity, perhaps with an extra splash of the dry vermouth he uses, to brighten the flavor and coax out what little floral notes it has. Or, even better, add a micro-julienne of a single, preserved lemon peel to the sofrito at the beginning. It would provide the high note the saffron is failing to deliver. She finished speaking. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of tension, but of awe. A waitress had just delivered a dissertation on culinary science with more grace and precision than any celebrity chef on television. She had not only validated a customer's complaint, but had also explained its cause and offered a solution, all while refusing to be humiliated. She had turned an act of cruelty into a moment of astonishing dignity and brilliance. Unseen by the drama unfolding in the center of the room, Mr. Sterling had been drawn from his office by the sudden, unnatural silence followed by Mrs. Davenport's raised voice. He had descended the stairs and stood in the arched doorway leading to the dining room, his intention to quickly and quietly resolve whatever incident his manager was failing to handle. But then he stopped and listened. He heard the demand for Alara to kneel. He saw his manager freeze, saw the ugly, triumphant look on Mrs. Davenport's face, and felt a surge of disgust. He was about to step in, to put a stop to the whole disgraceful affair, but then Alara spoke. He heard her refuse, her voice a clear bell in the toxic silence. And then he heard her explanation. As she spoke about the saffron, about the notes of honey and meadow, about the acidity and the preserved lemon peel, Mr. Sterling felt a jolt, as if he'd been struck by lightning. This wasn't a waitress. This was an artist. This was a connoisseur. Her words painted a picture of flavor so vivid he could almost taste it. In that moment, he didn't just see past her uniform, he saw the very thing he had been searching for. He saw the soul his restaurant had lost. It wasn't in his celebrity chef, or his fastidious manager, or his expensive ingredients. It was here, standing in a puddle of spilled wine, in the form of a quiet young woman he had never even bothered to learn the name of. As Alara finished, Marcus finally found his voice, shaking with rage and panic. That is entirely inappropriate. You are fired. Get your things and leave immediately. He turned to Mrs. Davenport, bowing and scraping. Ma'am, I am so sorry for her insolence, that's enough, Marcus. Mr. Sterling's voice cut through the air like a blade. He strode into the center of the room, his face a mask of cold fury directed not at Alara, but at his manager and his customer. Marcus froze, his face paling. Mrs. Davenport looked momentarily taken aback. Sterling ignored them both and walked directly to Alara. He stopped in front of her, his eyes, which had always been clouded with worry, were now sharp and focused. Would you please repeat what you just said? He asked, his voice gentle, respectful. Alara, startled by the owner's sudden appearance, hesitated for a second, then calmly repeated her analysis of the saffron. Sterling listened intently, nodding slowly. When she was done, he said, "Wait here." He turned and walked directly into the kitchen. The diners murmured, a buzz of confusion and anticipation filling the room. Less than a minute later, he returned, holding a small, clear container of crimson threads. He walked back to Mrs. Davenport's table. "Chef Julian confirms it," he announced to the room. "Our usual shipment of Spanish saffron was delayed. This is a temporary substitute." He didn't think anyone would notice. He looked from the saffron in his hand to Alara, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just found a priceless treasure in his own backyard. Mr. Sterling set the container of saffron down on the table with a soft click. He then turned his full attention to Mrs. Davenport, his expression no longer smiling. His voice was low, but it resonated with an authority that no one in the room had ever heard from him before. "Madam," he began, "for years, you have been a patron of this restaurant. And for years, my staff has tolerated your rudeness and your disrespect because the customer is always right, but today, you have shown that to be a lie. You were right about the dish, but you were profoundly, disgustingly wrong in your treatment of a human being." Mrs. Davenport opened her mouth to protest, a splutter of indignant rage, but Sterling held up a hand, silencing her. "You demanded that a member of my staff kneel before you in an act of petty tyranny. You tried to humiliate a young woman who possesses more grace, more dignity, and more knowledge of fine cuisine in her little finger than most people acquire in a lifetime." His gaze swept over the other diners, who were now leaning forward, hanging on his every word. He then turned back to Alara, his eyes softening. This young woman did not just identify a problem, she understood it. She diagnosed it with the precision of a scientist and the soul of a poet. She represents everything this restaurant has lost, and everything I hope it can be again. He looked at her, and for the first time, he asked the most basic, important question. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "It's Alara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Alara," he repeated, savoring the name as if it were a revelation. A beautiful name. He then did something that sent a final, powerful shockwave through the room. Arthur Sterling, owner of the legendary Gilded Spoon, a man of wealth and influence, stood before the quiet waitress and gave a short, formal, and deeply respectful bow from the waist. It was not the bow of a subordinate, but the bow of one master acknowledging another. "Alara," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity as he straightened up. "Your insight is what this place has been missing. Not just your palate but your character." He then asked, right there in front of everyone, "Would you be willing to help me fix this restaurant?" The sight of the owner bowing to the waitress was the final, devastating blow to Mrs. Davenport's arrogance. Her face, a mask of fury moments before, was now slack with shock and utter humiliation. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. She was no longer the queen of the room, she was a disgraced tyrant, exposed for her cruelty. Marcus stood beside her, looking as if the floor had dissolved beneath his feet. He stared at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time, not as the girl, or a nameless uniform, but as a force of nature that had just reshaped his world. The room remained silent, witnessing not the firing of a waitress but the birth of a star. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Mrs. Davenport, red-faced and sputtering, gathered what little dignity she had left and stormed out of the restaurant without a backward glance, her companions scurrying after her. Her reign of terror at the Gilded Spoon was over. Mr. Sterling turned to Marcus, his expression grim. "My office." "Monday morning," he said, the 3 words carrying the weight of a 1,000-page performance review. "And you will start by apologizing to every member of the staff you have ever disrespected, beginning with Miss Alara." Marcus nodded meekly, his usual bluster completely gone. For the rest of the evening, he was a changed man, speaking to the staff with a newfound, if terrified, respect. But Mr. Sterling's focus was entirely on Alara. "Come with me," he said gently, and led her away from the gawking diners, past the service station, and through the swinging doors into the heart of the restaurant, the kitchen. The kitchen staff, who had heard the commotion, fell silent as they entered. Chef Julian, his face a mixture of shame and curiosity, stood by his prep station. Sterling addressed him directly. "Julian, this is Alara. She is the one who identified the issue with the saffron." The chef looked at Alara, a flicker of professional pride warring with begrudging respect. "She was right," he admitted gruffly. "I underestimated the palate of our clientele." "You underestimated the palate of our staff," Sterling corrected him gently. "Alara, would you mind explaining your idea about the preserved lemon?" Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, Alara shared her thoughts. She spoke of balancing flavors, of creating layers of taste, of how food should tell a story. As she talked, the hardened, cynical chefs gathered around, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue, and finally, to admiration. She wasn't just talking about ingredients, she was talking about magic. After she finished, Sterling led her to a quiet corner of the kitchen. "Tell me about yourself, Alara," he said. "Where did you learn all of this?" And so, for the first time in years, Alara opened the locked door to her past. She told him about her father, his little restaurant, the fire, the way he taught her to taste the world. She spoke of her passion for food, a passion she thought she had to keep hidden forever. Mr. Sterling listened, his heart aching for her loss but soaring with the discovery of her gift. When she was done, he looked at her with profound respect. "Alara, your father gave you an incredible gift. And you have honored him by keeping it alive. I want to give you a chance to use it." Not as a waitress, but as a partner, he offered her a position he created on the spot, culinary creative consultant. Her job would be to work with him and the chefs, to taste everything, to challenge them, to help them find the soul in their food again. He wasn't just offering her a job, he was offering her a chance to reclaim her father's legacy and build her own. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would love that." A montage of transformation began. The next day, Alara arrived at the restaurant not in her black and white uniform, but in her own clothes, carrying a small notebook filled with her father's recipes and her own ideas. She walked into the kitchen not as a servant but as a collaborator. There was resistance at first, especially from Chef Julian, but her palate was undeniable. She could taste a sauce and tell him it needed 2 more minutes on the heat. She could smell a spice blend and know it was missing a pinch of cardamom. Slowly she earned their trust, not by commanding but by inspiring. She didn't just critique, she celebrated what was right, and gently guided them toward what could be better. The menu began to change. The rigid, classic dishes were still there but they were reborn. The saffron risotto was now made with preserved lemon and the finest Spanish saffron, and it was named on the menu as Risotto Alara. New dishes appeared, inspired by the warm, soulful cooking of her father. The entire atmosphere of the Gilded Spoon began to shift. The stuffy silence was replaced by a low, happy hum of conversation. The food was no longer just beautiful, it was emotional. It tasted of passion, of memory, and of a newfound joy. Mr. Sterling watched it all, his own love for the business reignited. He saw his staff smiling, his chefs experimenting, and his dining room full of people who were not just eating, but truly savoring their experience. And at the center of it all was Alara, no longer a ghost in the background but a radiant, guiding light. The Gilded Spoon was reborn. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a destination. The booking list was months long, and the critics who had been sharpening their knives were now writing love letters. They raved about the Renaissance, the return to soul, the magic that had been infused into the menu. The coveted Michelin star wasn't lost, rumors were that a second one was on the horizon. Alara moved through the dining room now not as a server but as a presence. She wore a simple, elegant chef's jacket, her name embroidered over the pocket. She would talk to diners, share the stories behind the dishes, her face animated with the passion she had kept hidden for so long. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, celebrated, and respected. The staff adored her. She had shown them that every role had value, and her quiet strength had inspired a new culture of mutual respect. Marcus, the manager, was still there, but he was a changed man. Humbled by the experience, he had learned to see his staff as people, to lead with encouragement instead of fear. He often went to Alara for advice, and he always treated her with a deference that bordered on reverence. One evening, Mr. Sterling stood by the entrance, watching the scene. He saw Alara laughing with a table of guests, as she described her father's method for making pasta. He saw Chef Julian bring a small, experimental dish out for her to taste, watching her reaction with the hopeful anxiety of a student. He saw the joy, the warmth, the life that now filled every corner of the room. He had been a caretaker of a museum, and now, thanks to Alara, he was the proprietor of a living, breathing work of art. He had been looking for a solution in spreadsheets and profit margins, when the answer had been in a human heart all along. And so, we come back to the beginning. We judged her by her apron. We saw a servant. We dismissed her because of her station. But that uniform was just a costume she was forced to wear, hiding the queen she had always been inside. Her story is a powerful reminder that a person's value is not defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. True worth lies in our character, in our passion, in the hidden gifts we carry within us. It is the fire in our souls that matters, not the role we play in the world. How many Alaras do we walk past every single day? The janitor with a poet's heart, the cashier who is a brilliant mathematician, the bus driver who has the wisdom of a philosopher. We will never know if we only see the uniform. The next time you meet someone, look closer. Look past the surface, beyond the role they are playing. Try to see the person, the unique and brilliant soul standing before you. Share this story with someone you know who feels invisible, or with someone who needs to be reminded to see the greatness in others. And most importantly, take a moment to tell someone in your own life that you see their true worth. Because a single moment of recognition, one person choosing to see the real you, can be the spark that changes a world.